Welcome to our session. Thank you for your patience as we worked out a couple of kinks. So you are in the session of Latinitas, celebrating 40 Big Dreamers by Juliet Menéndez. She is a Guatemalan American author and illustrator who is living between Guatemala City, Paris, and New York. She has worked as a bilingual teacher in New York City's public schools. Juliet noted the need for more books that depicted children like the ones in her classrooms. She studied design and illustration in Paris and now spends her days with her watercolors and notebook. Latinitas is her first children's book, and she will be talking to us about it. I'm Daisy Dockery, your moderator for today. Please make sure that if you have any questions that you place them in the chat, and we will make sure to answer those questions as soon as we can. Also, we hope you'll consider purchasing Juliet Menéndez's book from Nowhere Bookshop. That is a local bookstore, and it is the Book Festival's bookseller. It's an independent bookstore, and we've had a hard time during the pandemic, so we hope you'll support them and these writers and the festival by purchasing their excellent books. Just click on the Buy the Book button on the festival site. And without further ado, please join us in welcoming Juliet.
Hi, hola, good morning.
Juliet, one of the things that I love about your book is that I am also a Latina, and this is a very much needed book. And so we've been reading books about women more lately, and they've entered the scene. But now we have Latinas that are being displayed here and shown their worth. So I, for one, am glad that you came up with this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
How did you begin the process of going through and selecting your Latinas?
Yes, well, it was a very hard process. You know, there's so many to choose from, and I never intended this book to be comprehensive, but what I did want is to be able to show children, especially since this book was inspired by my students back in 2014. I'm sorry, is there a little bit of an echo?
I'm not hearing one.
Okay, I just want to check. Yeah, so this book was inspired by students back in 2014 when I was working as an art teacher, and I was working with students who came from families that came from mainly the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. And, you know, what I wanted to do is I had seen these posters up on the walls of people like Benjamin Franklin, Einstein, and Dali. And what I really wanted to do was just, you know, show posters of people that looked more like my students and came from their backgrounds. So when I started this project, I was really just thinking, you know, how many possibilities can I show my students? How many different professions? I want to show them different backgrounds, all these different traditions and cultures within Latin America and within Latinx communities in the United States. And I just wanted to show them as much as possible. So when I was selecting the 40 women, I started with the professions, and then I just wanted to show different backgrounds and experiences and different types of heritage that they would have. But of course, there were so many more. I could create so many more of these books, and I hope more people contribute as well to showing these stories that I think are so valuable.
Absolutely. One of the ones that I enjoyed reading about. So I thought I knew a lot about Latinas, Latina women, and this book just brought to light so many others that I hadn't heard before. So like we grow up being inspired by women like Elizabeth Blackwell. But then as I'm reading your book, I realize, Matilde Hidalgo is in there, and she's one of the first women that was a doctor. And so we don't hear of those women that kind of, broke barriers. So that was something that I really enjoyed reading about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I love Matilde Hidalgo's story. I can't imagine, not having heard of her when I was young, because she literally, what didn't she do? She was a doctor. She was she was the first suffragette, in Latin America. I'm seeing that there are people writing that there's still echoes. And one of the suggestions is to mute while one of us isn't talking. I'm thinking maybe this is better because, I'm not hearing it as much now. So great. Thank you so much. So you were talking about Matilde Hidalgo, and she's definitely one of the ones that stood out to me because she's just done so much, and she was just so, at the forefront of all of these different movements. And I think that so much of it was just that she felt compelled. She knew that she had something to offer, and she knew that so many other women had something to offer. And I just love that she made that leap into making opportunities more available for everyone. But I'm sorry, I think I missed the rest of your question.
No, that's okay. I think we're trying to make sure we sound okay. I think we've got it set up so that the echo's not there. I can go get some headphones while we ask a next question. But no, that was perfect. Again, because it's great to hear about women in our youth, like Elizabeth Blackwell or Marie Claire Curie. But it's great to have that diversity, to know that there's others that don't fit that same mold. And so I, for one, I'm very grateful for that. And the wide range of the Latinas that you chose, right? So we don't just have one aspect. We don't only have the sciences, but we have the arts, and so the variety of what Latinas that you chose creates a great wealth of information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Remember, if you have any questions, please go ahead and place them in the chat and we will answer them. I remember when the Rebel, I don't know if you've read the Rebel Girls books of where it highlights, just like this one, all the women. And so I remember being excited and reading that with my girls. And then, of course, when I had no idea that you had this book. And then it came out, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so we've been absorbing up. And I love how you also mentioned one of them that where she's very embarrassed about her skin color and has to work through that and overcome the biases that she received from people in her community.
Yes, I think you're talking about Victoria Santa Cruz, and yes, her story is so powerful. She was born in Peru, in Lima, Peru, and her story really stood out to me when I found her actually while researching some other poets, and I first came across her with her poetry, Me Gritaron Negra, and the performance that she did. And yes, there are so many different types of Latinas that you can see in this book, and she's certainly one that shows that pride in she when she was little, she certainly felt pride in her family. Her mother and father made her feel comfortable in her own skin. But when she got to school, there was this little girl that actually came from the United States who was new to her school, and she had blonde hair and blue eyes. And at first they were excited to play with her and her friends. But the little girl was like, oh, you know, if that negra is going to play, then I'm not. And that's really what started her sense of not knowing whether there was something bad about being negra. And that's when she started, you know, putting powder on her skin, straightening her hair. And what I love about her story is that she did have this, you know, this moment when she felt that way throughout her childhood. But what I loved was that what brought her kind of to this sense of pride was seeing all of the amazing accomplishments of different poets like herself, of musicians, of singers, you know, of philosophers, of scientists within the Black community that really just made her feel filled with pride again. And that same pride inspired her to open a theater with her brother to feature Black musicians and artists and actors. And that's really how she ended up feeling comfortable in her own skin again, and also bringing so many other people with her to feel that sense of pride and to just really showcase excellence within her Afro-Latina community. And I love her story so much.
It's definitely a powerful one. I think we can, there are many women who go through that process of doubting what they look like and trying to fit in. And so I know I gravitated towards that story, and I read it to my children several times, and just accepting who you are, and there's beauty in that diversity. So I know it's appreciated. And as you mentioned, young girls in schools need those voices so very much in our world. And they're long overdue in our world, in our community. I am I looked at your bibliography, your references, and so your sources. That is a huge amount of research that you did. And I know I looked at some of the sources and thought some of these must have taken you an extreme amount of time and effort to put together to make sure that the information was accurate. And so did you have any difficulty finding some of the information or validating some of it?
Sorry, for sure. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry to everyone who is listening today. This has been quite a morning. Trying to get the technical difficulties sorted out. Yes, for sure. I was saying there was so much research that went into this book. I'm so thankful that you took a look at the bibliography, because there's so much more to learn about the women included. Of course, 4 paragraphs is never enough, but it was just a starting point, really. So I'm so glad you looked at that. And the research process for me was one of the hardest parts of creating this book, because when I began this project as a poster project, I was originally just thinking of looking up different figures from Latinx history, not necessarily women. And it was precisely the lack of resources that I was finding about women that, you know, I was seeing them relegated to footnotes, and there wasn't much information about a lot of these stories. And, you know, now I'm so happy to see that there are many Wikipedia pages about a lot of these women, but actually when I started researching, there was barely anything about most of these women. And that's really what inspired me to make this book and celebrate these stories, was when I didn't find that much. If there was anything that was going to bring out the feminist in me, it was that. And so when I was researching, it took a lot of work to track down different books. I would find books that some of these women had written or were written about them, but a lot of them were no longer in print, or were difficult to find, or were only, you know, maybe in the country where they were born. So I spent a lot of time just tracking down the materials themselves. and contacting people. And there were a lot of wonderful people who helped me along the way, sharing materials with me. For example, for the profile of Gumercinda Paez, and the congresswoman, or the playwright turned congresswoman in Panama. I didn't actually have much information about her in the beginning. I just knew that she had written these radio novelas and that they became the pillars of her work as a congresswoman, really fighting for different types of recognition within her community. And she actually procured a lot of different things that we're still working for in the United States today, like health, childcare for women and their families, and also paid maternity leave, and the recognition of Afro-Latinx rights. And so I think I just was inspired by her story, but I didn't know that much about her childhood, which was a very important part for me throughout this process, really making sure that I had this kind of narrative where it started with the childhood stories and the seeds and that kind of sparked their journeys that they would take throughout their lives. And I didn't know that much about her, but a current congresswoman in Panama, Balbina Herrera, sent me pages of her book through WhatsApp. And another woman, Dania Batista, wrote her dissertation, which I just found out now turned into a book about Gumercinda Paez. And she sent me her whole dissertation, everything she had researched about Gumercinda Paez, and I was just so thankful. And there were many other people who helped along the way, just sending me little bits and pieces, or materials that were hard to find, either taking photos or scanning them in and sending them to me from different countries. And it was very, very meaningful. Apart from that, I just delved into things like web archives and old newspaper articles looking for information, but it was definitely quite a lengthy process for sure.
Well, as a school librarian, I was excited to see that the list of sources, as a way to show the students that whenever we're talking about information, even with biographies, that the sources that you have are important. And so I know I looked at a couple of these, and I was surprised to see that some of the books were available at our public library, which speaks volumes that they still have some of these information, some of these books, mostly from the authors that you listed. But yeah, I can imagine that some of it you had to really dig for that to gather all that information. And I'm glad that you mentioned the complexity of the lives of the individuals, because they weren't just one thing. Many of them, as you mentioned and highlighted in your book, had complex lives and participated in multiple areas in the world, and a lot of them were activists. And it's inspiring to see that, right? So we're not just lawyers, or we're not just scientists. We're fighting for the community and trying to bring about change. And I think that's an important message, that you don't have we're not just activists, right? We're so many other things. We don't have any questions so far from our audience members.
I'm actually seeing one question. It looks like it's from Oralia Lara Vargas. She writes, did you find a common denominator among these wonderful Latinitas or Latinas? Sorry. So I guess, I don't know, I guess I'll go ahead and answer, just because it's the first question that popped up. Okay. Yeah, so I did. One of the things that I noticed about these different women while I was researching, of course, I wanted to show this wide variety of professions and different backgrounds, as I mentioned. But one of the things that was also really important to me was that these women were also amazing people, to be honest. And I didn't know how to define that initially. But as I was researching, I kept thinking, you know, something that really stands out to me is not only that these women often helped their communities in so many ways, but that they really supported all women. They didn't view themselves as an exception to the rule, a diamond shining in the rough, but rather as part of a collection of gems where everyone had this similar potential to shine and had wonderful talents to contribute. And the first Latinita in this book is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. And her story inspired me so much because given that she wasn't allowed to attend university because only men were allowed to attend back in the 1600s, which is just amazing to me that she was such a strong feminist back then. She decided to do her own research and teach herself, and she found out about all these amazing women, including Nicostrata and Hypatia, and, you know, these philosophers and scientists. And her conclusion was that, you know, I'm part of this amazing group of women, and all women have so much to contribute. And so I began the book with her, and that same perspective carries through the book, where each of these women, you know, reject the idea of tokenism. They're not looking to be the one and only woman who did this or that. Although sometimes they were the first, they certainly wanted to keep that door open. As I remember hearing Kamala Harris say that in her speech, you know, make sure you're not the last. And all of them really shared that belief. And it was so important to me to include women who viewed all women as with this ability to shine and have so much to offer the world.
Thank you, Aurelia, for that question, and my apologies for not seeing it. Yes, that is, I love that. And so, did you have difficulty selecting your Latinas? Because you also included, you know, that here are some more Latinas that didn't make it into the book. And so I imagine that could be a difficult task, selecting which ones to include.
Yes, I did have a lot of difficulty deciding which ones to include, because as I said, there are just so many more. But I think at a certain point, I thought about it more in terms of, do I have a personal connection with these women? Can I somehow understand where they're coming from? Do I think that, you know, especially children will be able to relate to these stories? And so much of it was whether or not I had enough information about their childhoods. That was a really big factor, because I knew that I wanted children to be able to see themselves reflected in these stories, to see that these women weren't these, they have done these amazing things and created these had these big contributions, but at the same time, they started out as little girls, and they had very similar interests, passions to the little girls now, you know, and all children, really. I mean, these stories are very universal, and I wanted people to be able to relate to these stories, to be able to see that these women had very similar issues, feeling like they didn't belong, not knowing how to stand up for themselves, trying to figure out how to make things more fair, that all of us share. And so if I had enough of their stories to be able to put something like that together, that was a very big deciding factor. But honestly, I've said so many times, it was never meant to be comprehensive, and there's so many more stories I could include that are equally inspiring and beautiful. I just really wanted to show a range to begin with, but it was never meant to be all encompassing or anything like that. So I just kind of based which stories am I connecting with now? What have I found out about now? And we'll see what happens in the future, if there's a Latinitas 2 or something like that. But for now, I just wanted to show a range, but it's not all inclusive or comprehensive, and it never could be.
I agree. As with anything in life, there's never enough or never enough time. Well, so you mentioned maybe a Latinitas too. Are there certain women that you feel Latinas that you feel that perhaps there could make it into Latinas too?
For sure, there's so many more. Even just the ones that are in Más Latinitas, the more Latinitas section, all of those I would have loved to have, written about as well. And there's so many more that aren't in that section either. I have notes and notes. I write everything by hand in these little notebooks actually, that my partner made for me. I have like a collection of like 10 where I just took so many notes, and there are lots of stories that I certainly would have wanted to include. And who knows? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a big collection like this either. Maybe just little books, and other people, I'm sure, are going to start writing about these women as well. So I hope that so many more stories get added to the collection.
One of the things that I was interested in is how some of them were told that they couldn't do something, but I was surprised to see many of them had supportive families. I think at one point some had supportive father figures, and we always talk about the machismo of the men, of the Latin men, and so did any of that surprise you as you were researching?
I think that yes and no. I mean, I think that the machismo is definitely there, as it is all around the world. But I think that there are often family members who have been very supportive all along, and there's always been men. I mean, there are many, many men in the feminist movement now, and there have been for a long time. And for example, Antonia Navarro, the topographical engineer from El Salvador, who was the first to graduate as an engineer in Central America, and at the end of the 1800s, and she grew up with her brothers and her single mother, and I think they are the ones who really helped her too, to encourage her to continue her studies in math on her own, and they helped her get into the school as well. They supported her in that process, as well as actually Matilde Hidalgo, her husband, was a lawyer, and he really helped her figure out, what do I need to do to be able to vote? How is this actually legal that I'm being excluded from the vote? And, there are different people along the way. So it was certainly a collaboration, as I think it needs to be with all of these causes, whether it's feminism or some other type of oppression. I think it is a collaborative effort. It can never just be, women shouting from, their own perspective about things that are wrong. It needs to be people coming together and supporting them. And I was really happy to find that. At the same time, in some ways it wasn't surprising, because I find so many people are willing to be supportive, if, especially I think one thing that was telling is a lot of the men in this book, though I do not mention them very much, who were supportive, I noticed that they often had older sisters, or they had a single mother, and they got this sense of like, yes, these are important people in my life that really need to be supported. But I like that kind of common trend. I don't know exactly what that says, but I did notice that in quite a few stories while I was researching.
Definitely maybe an influence, something to explore, even if it's observational, right? So you spent some time in schools, and so had you already been talking about some of these Latinas to your students? And so did you try to work them into the curriculum?
That's a great question, and I wish that I had been able to teach my specific students that I was working with in Upper Manhattan. I had the idea for this, but I was working as an art teacher, so I did involve certain artists from Latin America when I was teaching. But this project grew so much bigger than specifically focusing on art. And I'm now living in Guatemala City. And I've certainly included some of these things. I've been doing some workshops with the National Library here, and I've been able to include it, but I was not actually able to do that while I was in the United States. I was kind of still in the research process and figuring out there's different stories and seeing how I could communicate them to children. So at that time, no, I didn't.
And I was guilty of that too. I've spent several years in the classroom, and it wasn't until I was confident and comfortable that I started diversifying my curriculum and realizing how important it was. And I think that's just something that we've overlooked throughout the years. And so one more reason that it's a great thing that you've written this book and that we can include it in our libraries and try to figure out, how do we make sure that we're including these women when we talk about science or we talk about art. And so this is a great addition. So as mentioned in the chat, please make sure to purchase this book and support not only our community, but also authors who continue to bring voices to many of the Latinas throughout the world. Very important for our children and for even for ourselves as we make our way and try to help our children become these great people. Any more questions from the audience as we wrap up our session? We do have one question from Maricela asked, if granted a dream project, which Latinas story would you choose to see represented as a biopic on screen and why?
Oh, wow. That's an amazing question. At the same time, I really don't know because it would be so hard to choose just one. I love them all so much. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would love to see any of their stories turned into a biopic. I think for me, I guess just very selfishly because I'm a Guatemalteca, I guess I would love to see a story of Rigoberta Menchutum, la doctora Rigoberta Menchutum, because she's from Guatemala like me. And I grew up without seeing any Guatemalans represented in children's books. And so I think I would really love to see something like that. But I really could never pick between them. I do love them all so equally. She just happens to be from Guatemala like me. So
that's a tough question. One I'm sure that you're going to continuously get asked, which one's your favorite? But I think when we read it, we feel so empowered that we've had the privilege to get to know so many more that we didn't before. So while we might have a favorite, I love the range in which you selected them. And then we have the ones that you included that are present day that we can continue to follow and look up to as great inspiration.
Yeah, I will just say that, I think there have been some wonderful documentaries. Like I know there was one that came out about Chavela Vargas, Dolores Huerta. I'm so happy to see those. So I think really any of the ones that haven't yet had a documentary made about them or this biopic, I would love to see that happen because these stories are really just incredible. And there's so much more to them than ones I've included. I would love to see one about Comercio Tapayes, who I mentioned, or Victoria Santa Cruz, or, any of these people. I think they are rich with possibilities.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Juliet. I am so excited that you've published this book and that you're hinting at some more or possibly something else. And so just the voices are much needed. And so thank you for researching and continuing that search for more Latinas. Any last questions from audience members that perhaps maybe you'd like to ask? We have maybe 1 minute left.
I don't know if anyone can still hear me. I just want to say that I'm so thankful to have been able to talk about Latinitas so much for your support. And I just want to let you also in August it's coming out. The English version will be available in August.
Thank you so much to everyone for attending our session. And please make sure to support both the San Antonio Book Festival, our author, Juliet Menéndez, by purchasing her book through the Nowhere Books tab. Just click on the blue button. And we're so glad that you took the time to join us today. Thank you, Juliet, so much for your visit.
Thank you for these wonderful questions, and thank you so much. So glad I got to be